So welcome back to the Raising Our Vibration podcast, where we explore higher consciousness through spiritual practice. And today, Stephen and I are going to talk about Krishnamurti'S radical message for the social media age. So, Stephen, I don't think there could be a more stark contrast between two things than the consciousness on social media and the message of Krishnamurti. So we're going to begin today with reading some of that message of Krishnamurti. And I'm going to read from The Awakening of Intelligence, and specifically the chapter called The Art of Seeing. And I was reading this book back in 1984, which was a very pivotal year in the development of this consciousness here. And this book was really a catalyst. So let's read some from Krishnamurti to get us started. So, The Art of Seeing. How very important it is to observe. It is quite an art to which one must give a great deal of attention. We only see very partially. We never see anything completely, with the totality of our mind or with the fullness of our heart. We never see anything completely for various reasons, because we are so concerned with our own problems, or we are so conditioned, so heavily burdened with belief, with tradition, with the past, that this actually prevents us from seeing or listening. Prevents us from seeing or listening. We never see a tree. We see the tree through the image that we have of it, the concept of that tree. But the concept, the knowledge, the experience is entirely different from the actual tree. If I know how to see a tree or a bird or a lovely face or the smile of a child, there it is. I don't have to do anything more. But that seeing of the bird, of the leaf, listening to the noise of birds, becomes almost impossible because of the image that one has built, not only about nature, but also about others. And these images actually prevent us from seeing and feeling. Feeling being entirely different from sentimentality and emotion. So we see everything fragmentarily. And we are trained from childhood to look, to observe, to learn, to live in a fragment. And there is the vast expanse of the mind, which we never touch or know. That mind is vast, immeasurable, but we never touch it. We don't know the quality of it because we have never looked at anything completely, with the totality of our mind, of our heart, of our nerves, of our eyes, of our ears. To us, the word, the concept, is extraordinarily important, not the acts of seeing. But having the concept, which is a belief, an idea, having this conceptual living prevents us from actually seeing. There must be a total revolution, a complete mutation in our minds, in our way of living, in our feeling, in the activities of our daily life. And to bring about such fundamental, deep revolution is only possible when we know how to look. You cannot see completely in this way if you are living, functioning, thinking, acting within a fragment of the total mind. Culture, society, books, radios, all that we listen to and see, the many influences of which we are either conscious or unconscious. All these encourage us to live within a very small fragment of the vast field of the mind. Unless we bring about a radical change in this fragmentation, there can be no revolution at all. There will be modifications, economic, social, and so-called cultural, but man will go on suffering. will go on in conflict, in war, in misery, in sorrow, and in despair. So that's Krishnamurti's message to us, that there's a radically different way of perceiving life, of perceiving ourselves, of perceiving the world. And as I said at the beginning, I don't think there's any more radically different way of seeing the world than social media presents to us these days. I mean, it's the epitome of partial seeing, of opinionated seeing, of fabrication. Everything is such an elaborate fabrication, and we don't recognize that. We just think there's either the right way or the wrong way of seeing, but we don't realize it's all fabricated. Because everything that we're talking about is made up and constructed, and we're just arguing between constructed realities. And you can clearly see the dissatisfaction in all of it. You can see that dissatisfaction so clearly on social media. I mean, it's so apparent that a majority of what's happening on there is projection of our dissatisfaction onto those whom we blame. Or conversely, attaching to and identifying to things that we think will make us happy or make us satisfied. But all of it, it's like an engine of dissatisfaction. All that grasping, all that aversion is by its nature unsatisfactory. So Krishnamurti offers us something different. And he gives us really clear instructions. If anything, he's so direct, so blunt that a lot of people, I think, are kind of put off by it. And he certainly was not averse to people being put off by his message. He was just all about hitting you straight on with it. So what is his message? What is radically different? How do we arrive at this different, radically different way of seeing that he called choiceless attention? And he talked about meditation as choiceless attention. So with that, Stephen, I'm going to pass over to you. And I know you had some experiences with followers of Krishnamurti at his centers. So tell us a little bit more.
Kevin, thank you. So yeah, love and blessings to everybody on this beautiful day. And just as Kevin said, this power of choiceless attention was something that I was particularly aware of when I went to Krishnamurti's school in India. So I was quite fortunate. I came to Krishnamurti's teachings very early on in my early teens because my brother had a whole stack of Krishnamurti books that he read from cover to cover. And I thought, what's my brother into? You know, my brother didn't necessarily read a lot of spiritual literature or, you know, religious texts or anything like that, but he just Krishnamurti caught him on fire. So I was strongly influenced by my brother, and as a result, I wrote to the Krishnamurti Foundation in India in the year of his death. Actually, he died in 1986, and that was the year that I decided to go because I was sort of strongly. There was a lot of shifting, of course, once Jiddu Krishnamurti passed. Is how do you continue on? You know, I think there's many stories told of, you know, him, some of his followers saying, you know, when they're standing by his bedside, and Krishnamurti would turn to them and say, you know, so who are you going to follow and what are you going to do when I'm gone? They'd say, well, I only follow you, you know, Jiddu. And he'd say, oh, then I'm gone already. I'm out of here. Because
you would definitely have some words for them about that. Like, you missed my whole teaching, right? Because he doesn't even like to speak of himself in the first person. He's the speaker.
The speaker,
right?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
He's not identified with being Krishnamurti.
Absolutely. You know, and I was very present to that when I got to the Rajgat Foundation, and as fate would have it, I was actually just visiting, and they knew I was coming. But the very day I arrived, one of their teachers of English and drama, and some music actually, left because her mum was very sick. So she said to me, I literally arrived at the door and we crossed paths, and she looked at me and she said, "You don't have to be a teacher, do you?" And I said, "Well, I can definitely teach. Why is that?" And she said, "Well, I've got to leave, on an emergency, and they're looking for a teacher and they haven't got one." So then she introduced me to the principal, and that was it. They put me up in Krishnamurti'S house, and so I had his own personal servants, who'd looked after him for so many years, became my own personal servants, and his gardener was my gardener, all that. So I was really present to lots of his friends who, you can imagine, just sitting with his gardener many times a day, just whiling away the hours for a few hours and talking about Krishnamurti and his, the power of his teaching. So I was very immersed in it, very saturated in it for that time that I was there. And I taught on his school, and I taught on, there were two schools. There was the Krishnamurti Foundation School, which was on about 50 acres of wildlife property. So it's very beautiful, right on the Ganges. And then I also taught in a rural village, miles and miles away. So it took ages to get there. And it had nothing. Like, I literally taught with myself and the kids. And it was pretty rich experience, because I got to see the contrasts of, Indian life. And so one thing, in terms of choiceless awareness, one thing I'm aware, as you said, Kevin, and I'm going to get you as you're listening, or all of you that are listening or are viewing this on YouTube, just to do this as a kind of a contemplation or a meditation with me. So I'll do it in the traditional way of Krishnamurti, and I'll use his words in this as well, because he was very particular about the way and the manner of the dialogue. And as I say, I was fortunate enough to live on his foundation. So we did many of these kinds of dialogues together as groups. And sometimes we'd lead, and I was fortunate enough to both teach and lead different, dialogues, as well as do lots of musical concerts. So I had a very rich time. So this is actually derived from a famous talk that Krishnamurti gave, called What is Meditation, in 1970. So if you're sitting there listening to this, or if you're driving a car, you might want to pull over, because we're just going to talk together, and we're going to talk together about what is meditation. So this is typically how Krishnamurti would do these. So as you're resting back, and you can do it with eyes open or eyes closed, I just want you to consider, because when we go into something like this, we should be really clear about what we're after. So you're just sitting there, and I want you to consider that we're always seeking something. It doesn't matter what if we're religiously minded, we're seeking something. If we're a scientist, we're seeking something. So seeking has become a real issue. So I just want you to consider, right this moment in your life, what are you seeking? And what are we seeking together? So this has to be really clearly understood before we go into what is meditation and why one should meditate at all. So what's the use of meditation? Where does it get you? So if you just consider meditation for yourself, the practices you've done, why you're doing it, where does it get you? And before we go into that, we want to be really clear about what we're seeking, each one of us. Because the word search or seek or run after something, it implies that we already know more or less what we're seeking. So when we say we're seeking truth, or we're seeking God, if we're a religious person, or if we're seeking a perfect life, or if we're seeking money, or we're seeking a relationship, or seeking health, we already have in our mind a pattern or an image or an idea of what it is. And to find it, we must already know its colors and its paths and its contours and textures and substance. So in seeking something, doesn't that also imply that we've lost something and we're going to find it? And that when we find it, we'll be able to recognize it, which means you've already known it. All that you have to do is go after it, search it out. And so the very first thing we realize is not to seek, because what you seek is predetermined. So if you're unhappy, you're going to search out something to sustain you, and you will find it. So in meditation, every form of search must come to an end. So just consider dropping all search as you're listening to this and just being completely open to what is. Every form of search comes to an end. And we lay a foundation of order. But here, to bring about order means to understand disorder. So order is not according to a blueprint that we've made up. It's not according to our identity or our own particular experience. And the order, how this order comes about, must be effortless, without any effort, because effort distorts. So consider this. Are we communicating with each other? Because we're talking about something very, very difficult. How to bring order about without any control. So this means letting go of control. And order can only exist when we understand disorder, the origin, how disorder comes into being in ourselves, to understand conflict in ourselves, not to overcome it, not to suppress it, but just as Kevin said, to see it, to observe it, and to observe it without any distortion, without any choice. Just as Kevin said, choiceless awareness. So without any compulsiveness towards finding answers or towards finding what we seek. So that's quite an arduous task. So order, which is virtue, comes about without effort. And when there's an understanding of disorder within ourselves. And without control. So that means understanding the controller. And if we understand all, then control and choice come totally to an end. This reaffirming what Kevin said, choiceless awareness. Control of anything implies division. It implies there's one who controls it and something to be controlled. And so there's conflict, there's distortion. And when you really understand this, that the controller is in fact the controlled, then conflict and control in every form comes to an end, which is the ending of separation. When there's an understanding of what's left, what is, then there's no need for control whatsoever. So these two essential things, we're now coming to understand them as we go into the question of what is meditation. Order, which is understanding disorder and control. It's duality. Right? The observer, the one who's angry, the one who's trying to get rid of anger, and anger itself. Because when we divide ourselves from anger or jealousy or hatred or despair, then there's contradiction and conflict and distortion, right? So this is the foundation Without this, you can't know what meditation is. Don't fool yourself by books or by people who tell you to do this or that, or you're supposed to do it this way, or the groups. Because if there's no virtue, which is order, then there's distortion. And the mind will live in contradiction, in effort. So how can such a mind in contradiction and effort be aware of the whole implication of meditation? And we must also, with one's whole being, come across this strange thing called love, which means to be without fear. Without love, and by love we mean what's not touched by pleasure, desire, jealousy. Love that knows no competition, love that doesn't divide into my love and your love and this love and that love. There must be that whole love. All that's necessary, because then the mind and the brain and the emotions are in complete harmony. Otherwise, meditation is just self-hypnosis, just suggesting to yourself something with a known end. So we're communicating with each other, which means we're sharing, journeying together. We're going together or not at all. So as you're listening, you're becoming more or less deeply established with this in yourself. You're observing what's happening within, your reactions to it. You're observing. If you're observing to what, according to what some psychologists told you, then you're not observing yourself. You're just observing what somebody else has said to you. But here, this is clear seeing, self-knowing, which implies awareness. Being taught how to be aware and how to first be deeply attentive is really crucial in meditation. Enlightenment doesn't come through a leader, through a teacher. It comes through understanding what is, which is in yourself, not running away from yourself. You don't need to join anything where some group promises you this or that. You don't need to use a talisman. You're just simply aware of what is going on, aware, without any distortion, without any choice. Now, if this is laid easefully, simply easefully, resting awareness without any hope of reaching anything, because if you are moving away from your despair, then you're not understanding what is. Then you're simply aware without choice, without distortion of what's present, of what's here. Now, we are very still all together here, aren't we? You're probably aware of it right now as we go on this journey. May I go into all this? Because you're becoming very still as you travel deeply inwards. So we're asking, what is meditation from this stillness, this choiceless awareness? And why should I meditate at all? What's all the fuss about? Maybe you have a concept of it, or you've been told that this wandering monk or this sadhu or this teacher that you meditate in a particular way, and it gives you a formula. And unfortunately, out of your greed, because it is greed and nothing else, you follow it. So here we're not offering you a thing. Please understand that, because any formula, method, or system becomes repetitive and mechanical without awareness. If you practice it, you become what the method offers, and then what the method offers is not truth, because truth is a living thing and method is mechanical. And if you practice it in the practice, watching yourself, there's one who practices and there's the thing to be practiced, and therefore there's division and conflict and distortion and disorder. So don't accept any system from anybody. So you observe without any support. And then you explore. Without anyone that does the exploring. So there's no accumulation. In this sense, there's a whole new meaning of just openness to whatever experiences arise. Just simple observation. And we often think of observation as being an object and an observer, but here, this is a whole new meaning of observation. This is to observe without the observer. And then the whole question of experience. Why do we want to experience? We have thousands of experiences all the time. And we want deeper, wider experiences. We want marvelous experiences, mystical experience, mysterious experience, godly experience, transcendental experience, spiritual. You want them all, don't you? It's because your own life seems so normal or small. So you want something bigger. And to demand greater experience, these greater spiritual experiences, is escaping from what is. And it's only through what is the most mysterious thing in life. So in experiences involve the whole process of recognition. Otherwise, you wouldn't know you had an experience. You wouldn't recognize it. So when you recognize it, it means you've already known. Generally, your experiences are out of the past. So there's nothing new. So there's a whole difference between this sense of observation, seeing, exploring that I'm speaking to. Then what is meditation? First of all, the mind that chatters, that projects ideas, that has contradiction, that lives in conflict. That mind must obviously be very quiet, mustn't it? Perhaps you're noticing that now, observing it. Observing that the mind must be extraordinarily quiet. When I truly listen, I must give attention to what's being said. I can't be chattering and I can't be thinking about something else. I'm not comparing. The mind is attentive, silent, quiet. So to observe clearly, the mind must be very quiet. To see clearly, the mind must be quiet. It's imperative to see the whole structure of your disorder or of your conflict. So to look at it, the mind must be completely still. So you have a still mind. You don't have to cultivate a still mind, because to cultivate a still mind implies one who cultivates it in the field of time, trying to achieve something. There's no control. Your mind is absolutely quiet. Completely quiet. This very act of listening like this is attention, which means not to practice anything at all. If you practice it, you've already become inattentive. You're just simply resting in choiceless awareness. So when you're attentive like this, listening to both the words and the spaces between the words, and your mind wanders off, which just means it's inattentive, let it wander off and know that it's inattentive. And the very awareness of that inattention is attention. Don't battle with it. Know that you're inattentive, and then immediately you are in awareness. Be aware, choicelessly, that you are inattentive. In that moment of inattention, there is action, there is movement. Be aware of that movement, that action. Silence of the mind is beauty itself. Listening to the bird, the voice. Just notice the sounds in your environment, and then you'll hear much more. And if your eyes are closed, open your eyes and see the objects in your environment, and you'll see much more. Right now, silence is not possible if your body is not also completely still. Be aware choicelessly of your body. Have you ever tried sitting completely still without a single movement of the body, including the eyes? Do it. Try it sometime. Or do it now. Okay, rest. In that moment of stillness, the wholeness of this meditation is revealed if you know how to look. So the body must be still. And there's great sensitivity. And there's love. So these three things are essential. knowing the intelligence of the body and being still, knowing your capacity. Knowing the fullness of love. Without any distortion. So now the body, the mind, including the brain and the heart, filled with love, are in total harmony. What's the point of harmony? Who is asking this question? If you are asking this question, what the point of it is, then it has none whatsoever. But if you have this extraordinary thing going on in your life, this love, and that love is everything, then you become all of that, the teacher, the disciple, the neighbor, the beauty of the cloud. You're all of that, and that is love. So rest now for a few moments in the silence and the stillness and the love. Simply be choicelessly aware of everything that arises. Body sensations, thoughts, feelings, perceptions, sounds, smells, sights, feelings. Thank you. Your mind is totally awake. The whole of the mind. And beyond that, every form of description is not the described, therefore we don't need to talk about it. All we can do is point to the door. And if you're willing to go, take a journey to the door. It's for you to walk. And then beyond that door, nobody can describe the thing that is not nameable. Whether that nameable is nothing or everything, it doesn't matter. Anybody who describes it doesn't know. And the one who says he knows doesn't know. Thank you truly, Kevin, and everyone who's listening for that wonderful dialogue.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you for sharing that practice from Krishnamurti. And thank you all for participating with us. Thank you for your practice. And if you're interested in more practices like these, you can visit us at raisingourvibration.net. We'd love to hear from you there. Bye for now.